Welcome to Advanced Racing Suspension's instructional video for how to rebuild quarter midget shocks. In this video, I will take you through disassembly and reassembly in order to rebuild and revalve your shock. First, insert the shock body into the vise, shaft pointing up, then remove the bleed screw from the closure nut. Unscrew the closure nut with the spanner and slide the closure nut up the shaft. Grasp the shaft underneath the shock eye, then wiggle and rotate the shaft slightly as you remove the shaft and piston assembly from the body. Remove the glide ring from the piston when you pull the piston out of the body. Then, dispose of the oil in the shock. Insert the shock eye into the vise, piston pointing up, then unscrew and remove the stainless steel check valve assembly from the shaft on top of the piston. Next, remove the piston, the shims, the stop washer, and the closure nut from the shaft assembly. To replace a bent shaft, first remove the movement indicator. Then use a 9/16 wrench to loosen the jam nut and unscrew the shaft from the eye. Screw the jam nut onto the new shaft until it is tight. Next, screw the shaft back into the shock eye using the 9/16 wrench to tighten it. Then replace the movement indicator. To replace a damaged closure nut, use a pick to remove the black wiper first. The next step is to remove the bushing by placing a rod through the top of the closure nut and hitting the bushing out. Lastly, use a pick to remove the seal from the bottom of the closure nut. First, replace the seal by wedging it into place from the back side of the closure nut. To replace the bushing, line it up with the back of the closure nut and use the vise to push the bushing into place. Tighten the vise until it is flush with the closure nut. Finally, wedge the black wiper in the front side of the closure nut to complete this assembly. Place the closure nut numbers down on the shaft. At this point, if you wish to revalve your shock, you should consult the revalve chart. This chart gives you a list of shims and piston specifications needed to have a certain valving. Now replace the stop washer, shims, and piston on the shaft. To complete the reassembly of the shaft, tighten the stainless steel check valve assembly to 100 inch-pounds. Insert the shock body into the vise and fill the shock body with oil. Coat the piston glide ring with oil and wrap it around the piston, holding it closed with your thumb and forefinger. Then reinsert the piston and shaft assembly into the body. Wiggle and rotate the shaft slightly until the piston glide ring clears the cylinder. Then lower the piston into the cylinder until it is completely covered with oil. Slide the bleed cup over the end of the shock body and fill the cup approximately half full of oil. Notice that air bubbles might come from the space between the bleed cup and the shock body. Wiggle the bleed cup to release these air bubbles. Grasp the shaft by the shock eye and cycle the piston through compression and rebound. Do this several times to remove air from the piston. Make sure that the piston does not come up out of the oil. Repeat this procedure until all air bubbles are removed from the shock. It is helpful to let the shock sit in the oil after a few cycles to let the air bubbles work their way to the surface. Next, hold the shaft assembly stationary at the top of the shock body. With the bleed screw removed from the closure nut, slide the closure nut assembly down the shaft and screw it into the shock body until it starts to get tight. Then back the closure nut off 2 turns. Cycle the shaft up and down until there are no air bubbles. Then pull the shaft assembly up until it is stopped by the bottom side of the closure nut, and install the bleed screw with a Phillips screwdriver. Finally, remove the bleed cup and tighten the closure nut after the bleed screw has been installed to complete the shock assembly. This concludes our video. Thanks for following along, and feel free to contact us with any questions.